Hello and welcome to another video. Now in this video we're going to take a look at Excel again and how we work with drop-down menus, and this is just a very useful trick that you can use if you've got the latest version of Excel. Now here we have a let's say a table of information that we want to fill in, and we have 3 different employees in so far. We have 3 different tasks, and we have a couple of different statuses for those tasks. Now because this is a table, if I go to the last cell in the table and if I press the tab key, what will happen is it will create a new row within the table for my entry, and I can now type in something into that cell. Now wouldn't it be easier if instead of that we had a drop-down menu? Now of course we all know how we can do this. We can actually have another sheet called lists, and on that sheet have a list of the names of all the employees, for example, and have a drop-down menu referring to that list. But what happens when we get a new employee arriving? Well, what we can do is within the data validation settings, which is what we use to make the drop-down list, within those settings we can allow people to type something in that's not on the list. But that doesn't help the next person who wants to use the list with that new employee automatically added to the list. So here's a little trick that you can use to make this happen. What I'm going to do when I'm building my lists is I'm going to cheat a little bit because I like to be lazy. So in the first one here I'm going to say this equals, and I'm going to go back to my data. I'm going to say the header of that, and now I'm going to do the ampersand sign, which means concatenate, so join together with, and I've put in some text to say it's the name of that plus list. Now this will just help me when I actually go onto that page, because I can now see that this is my list names rather than my data names. Now the other thing about this, because I referred to it and I referred to it with relative reference, I can fill that across to get the list for each of the other headings within my data. Now the trick here is using the new dynamic function called unique, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this cell here underneath name list equals, and I'm going to start typing in unique. Now do be careful that you actually choose the unique function and tab to accept. Now it says what do I want the unique of? In other words, what is the array that I want the unique values from? I'm going to go back to my table, and now if you watch here, if I hover over the B, it will select everything in column B. But if I bring my mouse down and hover over where I've got the name, can you see I get another black arrow? So if I click there, it now selects just the things that are in the table, and that's obviously what I want, just in case I had another table of data or some other data lower down. So that's what I want, and I press enter, and it now gives me a unique list of things within that table. Now the bottom one is showing a 0 because if you notice back on my table I have an empty row. So if I just delete that row, so I delete the table row and go back to my lists, you'll see that I don't now have that 0. Now again with the unique function, because that referred to the table name, if I drag it to the right, it should give me unique lists for the other columns as well. So this is a very clever way of building up your lists that you're going to use within the dynamic data validation drop-downs. Now we're going to go back to our table here, and I'm going to select all of the items in that column. So this is the data body range for name, not including the header, and I'm going to go to my data ribbon and I'm going to apply data validation. Now there's a couple of different ways I could do this data validation. I could apply the data validation to a named range, or because specifically I want to do it this way here, because I've used a cell with the unique, which is a spill function, I want to refer to just that cell. Now I need to refer to that cell which has the unique function in it rather than the range of cells that it's spilled into. So what I do is I say I'm going to allow a list and the source for my list, and I'm going to go to just the top cell that has the function in it, and I'm now going to press the hash key. Now the hash key, or pound if you're American, what that means is and all of the spilled values. Now this is particularly important, I'll explain why later on. So don't use a named range and then refer to the named range, because it won't update the unique function before it does the data validation. So doing it this way, it needs to update the unique function before it returns the result for the data validation, and that's what we want. So I click OK here, and all of those cells now have that in them. So if I go to the last one, press Tab, I can now use the drop-down menu to select one of the 3 things or the 0, because I now have the empty row there. But what I can also do is I can type in a new employee, and when I press Enter, it will accept the new employee, and it will have also added the new employee to the list here. Now this I find incredibly useful, because what it means is you don't have to keep coming back and adding things into this list just because you've allowed somebody to put something in which is not in the list, which you can do using normal data validation. Okay, why does this work? Well, because the data validation that needs to operate in order to check this cell has something that's in the list, well, it refers to a cell that has a function in it. So in order for it to actually work out whether the data is valid or not, it must first execute that function. And when it executes the function, it creates this list here, which includes the thing that you've just typed in. So that will then iterate that as allowable data before it then checks to see if it was allowable, and then it gives you the answer. Now what this means is that you can never type in a bad value. You're never going to get a warning telling you this is invalid data, but you can also add in whatever you like, and that will now become something that's added in for people to choose from the drop-down box the next time they try it. Now of course we could get rid of the zeros if we wanted, so back on that unique we could do an if before it and say if 0 then don't include the 0, just put it as a blank, but we're not going to do that for now. I do hope you found this useful. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe down below, and as always, thank you for listening.